Warning, this video may contain spoilers for late parts in the game. If you plan on playing this at some point, turn back now. You have been warned. Hello everyone, this review is going to be the same as my Spy Fox video, with doing the entire series at once, with the addition of another game, as Pajama Sam actually has 4, which I didn't even know there was a 4th one until a couple years ago. The first Pajama Sam game was the first game that got me into the Humongous series, and I'm really happy I picked it up at a Sam's Club all those years ago. I even have my original disc, though sadly I don't have the CD case. Also, the first American voice actress of Sam is Pamela Segal Adlon, also known for voicing Bobby in King of the Hill, Spinelli in Recess, and Otto in Time Squad. Just a nice fact. Let's get to the basics of the series. Pajama Sam shares the main game point of being a point-and-click adventure game, though what you have to do is a lot different from Spy Fox, as you aren't usually trying to stop a villain, except in the first game, but that will get explained when I talk about the story. For the most part, it's just about collecting specific necessary items that will help Sam along the way to further his goals throughout the games. There is an addition to Sam's games that I don't believe is in the others, and that is collecting secondary items that, when fully collected, will either help Sam in some way or just to get Sam something cool. A couple examples are that the first game has you collecting pairs of socks, and the final game has you collecting Pajama Man trading cards. Also, there are mini games you can find randomly throughout the games, though they don't do anything for the story or give you anything really useful. At night, Sam is seen reading his Pajama Man comics before his mom tells him to go to sleep, with Sam voicing his fears about the dark as his mother turns off his lights. Sam gets it in his head that all he needs to do is capture darkness to conquer his fear, so he collects his Pajama Man gear, a mask, a lunchbox, and a flashlight. He enters his closet but ends up falling into a creepy and scary new world called the Land of Darkness. Not long after, some of the trees in the forest come to life and steal all of his equipment, and he is forced to variously locate them with 8 possible ways to find each item, with some of the other inhabitants of the world helping him. After he finally retrieves all his gear, he decides to confront Darkness inside Darkness' own closet. When Sam explains that he is going to use his portable bad guy containment unit to trap Darkness, Darkness just asks Sam why he is the one afraid if he isn't going to be trapped in a lunchbox. Sam realizes that Darkness has no friends and decides to befriend Darkness instead, playing a quick game of cheese and crackers, which is just tic-tac-toe, but with cheese and crackers. As the first Humongous game I played, this knocked it out of the park and immediately had me craving more after I was done with it. I spent hours playing through this game just clicking on everything, but what really hooked me were the characters and the themes. Right off the bat, I connected with Sam, who was afraid of the dark, and I was the same way when I played this as a kid. I don't have any cons for this game and probably won't for the rest, as these are kids' games in the first place. It was more so about having a fun story with interesting characters that were important to me. Also, since I'm not going to be having an extra section, I'm just going to be putting some nice tidbits here, because they are technically pros to me. This was the first game in the Humongous library to actually use changing Game Pass, with, like I said, 8 different variations to where the main items you need to find are. The start of this game just has Sam chilling, putting a puzzle together, before a bolt of lightning scares him, scattering the puzzle pieces. Turns out, Sam is scared of thunder and lightning outside, but he decides to confront it by retrieving his cape and ascending the attic, where he walks to the top of the clouds, locating the headquarters and weather factory of Worldwide Weather. Sam actually meets the personification of thunder and lightning, but upon announcing his plans to defeat them, he trips and presses a button that messes everything up and causes 4 main pieces of the weather machine to break. They ask him to find the Snowflake Inspector, a wide pipe, a wing nut, and finally a velocimeter. After he fixes 3 of the pieces, he is informed that Mother Nature is coming to inspect the facility soon, with Sam rushing to fix the last piece, which he does. Sam races back to the control station with Mother Nature asking who the kid is before Thunder and Lightning exclaim that he's just a handyman. All of them sigh with relief, and they teach Sam that indeed Thunder and Lightning aren't so frightening by showing how to control the weather. This was one of the first games I was ever nostalgic for, as I'm pretty sure I ended up playing all the demos for it in the other Humongous games, so when I finally got to play this game, I had a great time with it. I somehow lost it after only playing the game once or twice, and I remembered really liking it, but as a kid, you can't just re-get something every time you lose it, and the original copy has sadly stayed lost since. The layout of the facility was crazy cool, and always had my imagination running on overdrive trying to figure out how it all worked, and of course just clicking on every single thing I could, which made the game last for hours. This is probably the craziest out of all the Pajama Sam games as far as story goes, but definitely crazy in a good way. The story starts with Sam just consuming cookies in order to get box tops for a Pajama Man action figure before he hears weird laughing, following it into the pantry that gets shut behind him, and he is kidnapped by food in the pantry. The weird thing is that he gets kidnapped to a party filled with junk food that is alive. He eats a giant cake and announces that he needs to go back to dinner to eat vegetables and becomes a prisoner of war as they put him in jail, which I'll explain in a second. In jail, he meets Florette, a piece of broccoli wearing a strange striped hat. She explains that she's a political prisoner and Sam helps her and himself out of the jail so she can arrive at the peace delegate meeting. Sam meets a carrot that was actually in the first two games, and he explains the meat and potatoes of everything with General Beatfoot. Apparently, the other delegates of the peace conference are meeting, and if they don't show up by the appointed time, all-out war will happen between the different food groups. Over the course of the game, Sam finds and helps Chuck Cheddar, Pierre LePain, Bean Number 47, and Granny Smythe reach the peace conference. Sadly, when Sam eventually arrives to the conference himself, he sees that all the food groups are still fighting before Sam gives an inspiring winger-like speech, points if you get the reference, which causes the food groups to finally reach an agreement. This is the cream of the crop for the Pajama Sam games to me. The characters are great, the setting is great, and you'll have a great time with how outrageous and fun the story is. Like I mentioned before, there are multiple versions of the games, randomized on boot up, and I actually like both versions I played in particular, though I don't know how many there actually are for this game. One of the versions lets you do a little library minigame that's pretty fun. There's also just a whole lot to do in this game in general, extending the playtime and the fun. The whole box topper secondary mission is great as well, letting you get a cool prize and just something nice for Sam at the end of the game. This time around, the story is a lot more simple than the others, but I still thought it was nice. Sam is watching some Pajama Man on TV before he sees an ad that Pajama Man will be coming to his local mall for an autograph signing. He asks his mom to take him, and when she says yes, he bolts to his room to find his Pajama Man issue number 1 for Pajama Man to sign, but his room is an absolute mess. When he eventually finds it in the piles, the comic gets pulled further in, with Sam rushing to get it, literally falling into one of his junk piles. When he enters, a sock tells him that a sandwich was seen walking with the comic to the local mall to get it signed by a Pajama Man villain named Dr. Grime. When he gets to the mall, Sam is stopped by a security guard who tells Sam that he needs a shirt, shoes, and socks or no service, so he goes looking for all those items before returning and gaining entry. Sam sees a giant line and gets lucky at the restaurant where he gains a fast pass for the line, though when he uses it, Sam gets mistaken for Dr. Grime because of how dirty he had gotten looking for his comic, getting trapped in Dr. Grime's room. He finds the comic in the room and decides to cover it as he sets the fire alarm off so he can get clean and back to his real life so he can get Pajama Man to sign his comic. I'm just going to go over my total thoughts on the game, as while I really don't think it's a horrible game, there are definitely visible flaws. I've only played the Steam port, but the lip sync was wildly off compared to the other games, and sadly it's very prevalent throughout the entire game. I'm not sure if the blame goes to Atari, who put the finishing touches on it, or Humongous, because the first Pajama Sam game was actually the one where they started doing the lip sync stuff in the first place. The game also felt a bit off in general, but maybe that's just me. One thing I didn't really have a problem with, that a good amount of other people did, was Sam's voice being different, now being voiced by Alicia Ferguson. I actually thought they were more going for a Sam was growing up type of thing. One thing I heavily liked more than the other games were the collectible cards, for obvious reasons, but also it was cool to get a bit more insight into the actual Pajama Man world. These games were great for my childhood, as they usually dealt with fears of some kind and learning that sometimes your fears can be seen in a much different light than they were originally, and I think it helped pave the way for me to eventually not be afraid of the dark anymore. So I think they did exactly what they were supposed to do as junior adventures and as kids games in general, at least for me. Hope you enjoyed, and see you next video.